3 years of marriage, and he loathes me to the core. When I went to ask him for a loan, he was attending a banquet with his girlfriend in his arms. When I mentioned I needed to borrow 100,000, she laughed and said, "You're not even worth that much for a night." Laughter erupted around me, as if watching a joke. He lifted his eyelids, smiling politely. "We're not divorced yet." Though it was a warning, his words were filled with indulgence. Now it's the woman sitting beside him, Laura, who wields Frank's power to bully others. She stuck out her tongue. "It's just a name without substance. Are you really going to scold me for her? Am I hearing this right? Not 1 million, not 10 million, but 100,000? Frank's girlfriend widened her eyes exaggeratedly, as if hearing a joke. "I remember your family used to be quite wealthy. How did it come to this?" Those words were like salt on my wounds. Since the passing of my parents, the Jiang family has fallen. Now, the new business elite is Frank. He practically holds the power of the heavens in his hands. Frank sat in the shadows, playing with a string of beads in his hand, coldly observing my embarrassment. The mocking gazes that followed seemed to pierce through my backbone. 3 years of marriage, and our relationship had long been a mere formality. Now it's Laura who sits beside him, wielding Frank's power to bully others.
Just 100,000, okay?
My voice trembled slightly, trying my best to maintain my dignity. "I'll do anything you ask." Laura looked at Frank with difficulty, and only when he didn't speak did she feel free to mock. "To be honest, you're not even worth that much for a night." Frank lifted his eyelids and smiled. "Laura, we're not divorced yet." Though it was a warning, his words were filled with indulgence. She stuck out her tongue. "It's just a name without substance. Are you really going to scold me for her? I'll give you the money." In the midst of the noise, Frank's partner suddenly spoke up. The surroundings immediately fell silent. I looked up in astonishment, a glimmer of hope igniting in my heart. Frank glanced at him indifferently, not stopping him, even lighting a cigarette. The partner leaned lazily against the sofa, flashing a frivolous smile. "1 piece for 10,000, start by taking off." The laughter around me almost lifted the ceiling. It was clear they were making fun of me. I felt like I'd been slapped in the face, frozen in place, unable to say a word for a long time. This was a formal banquet. Every attendee was a renowned figure in the industry, not in a KTV or a bar. How ironic. 10,000 could buy my dignity. "Take it off if you want. If you can't handle it, just leave." I glanced at Frank, who had remained aloof the entire time. "All right, I'll take it off." I lowered my head, my fingers trembling as I undid my coat. As the strapless dress was exposed under the lights, the attendees, who weren't initially clear on the situation, turned to look at me curiously. Frank's gaze grew colder, sitting in the shadows, watching me without moving. My neck, my collarbone, still bore faint love bites. All his handiwork.
"Take off the dress."
The partner licked his lips. Laura laughed so hard, she clapped her hands. I clutched the hem of my dress, my palms sweating. Suddenly, Frank moved. The black card was ruthlessly thrown at my chest. Frank leaned back, extinguishing his cigarette, his tone indifferent. "Enough, don't embarrass yourself." Outside, the rain poured heavily. I stood under the eaves, wrapped in a waiter's coat. I tightly gripped the black card in my hand, like holding onto a lifeline. It was cold, and I had to press the button several times before the call went through. On the other end of the line came the voice of my aunt. "Where's the money?" "Got it." Not long ago, I had a cold, and my voice was a bit thick with a nasal tone. I rubbed my nose and asked cautiously, "Has Xiaoqin's condition improved?" "Don't ask what you shouldn't." My aunt's tone was cold. "Deborah, this is what you should do, understand? The sins your father committed, you repay them. Whether you steal, rob, or sell yourself, our Xiaoqin can't die." In the car accident caused by my father, Xiaoqin became a vegetable. Now that my parents are gone, the task of atoning falls to me. "Okay, I understand." After hanging up, I looked up at the dark sky, the rain falling on my forehead, already numb to the cold. Only when someone approached from behind did I realize that Frank had come out, embracing Laura. "Kingsir, will you come to my place tonight?" Laura's tone was cheerful.
"No, next time."
Frank was concise. She didn't dare to argue, getting into Frank's car. The black car smoothly disappeared into the night, leaving the surroundings in silence. Frank suddenly pinched my chin, turning my face towards him. "Come home with me." The light in my eyes dimmed, silently preparing for what was about to happen. The door closed, cutting off the noise. Those long legs blocked me in the corner. Frank leisurely adjusted his tie, ordering, "Take it off." The driver was already used to it, raising the petition. Tomorrow, okay? I had been drenched in the rain, my body alternating between cold and hot, the dizziness growing stronger. Isn't it one piece for 10,000? A mocking laugh came from beside me. They can. Why can't I? He took off his wristwatch. The wedding ring on his ring finger reflected cold light. It was the one I chose myself. He still wears it. Not because he loves me, but to remind me that liking him is a heinous crime. I, Deborah, deserve to stay in hell for life. My pupils reflected the bustling streets, the stars in the sky swaying. Soon, tears blurred the light. The cigar smell in the car was strong. Frank was behind me, his hand on my waist, mocking without restraint. So thin. How desperate for money are you? Didn't I feed you enough? Cigar ash fell on my back, burning me. He knew too well how to make me crumble. Don't do this. Frank ignored me, his cold eyes engulfed by a blaze of fire, his words tinged with ferocity. My scalp tightened. He grabbed my hair, forcing me to lift my face and look at my reflection in the window. Hayes, you still dare to like me? Haven't you suffered enough? My mind was muddled. Curling up, I kept apologizing. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I helplessly scratched the leather seat, breaking my nails. Steam seeped through the window gap. In the haze, I remembered when Frank told me, as I will definitely marry you. But some things, after all, can never go back. His voice, weary behind me, shut up, you're not worthy of apologizing to me. In the evening, I woke up from my bed. After thinking for a while, I remembered, today is the anniversary of my parents' death. I dragged my tired body out of bed. Pushing open the door, the twilight light split the room in half. Half warm sunshine, half shadow. Frank, wearing casual clothes, sat on the sofa, flipping through our photos. In the photos, I was tightly hugging Frank's arm, smiling brightly and radiantly. Frank looked down, his eyes gentle. It seemed to be taken 5 or 6 years ago. Hearing the sound, he turned his head and looked at me. The eyes that once brimmed with tenderness were now filled with cold indifference. Do you know what day it is today? He asked. My voice was hoarse, I know. Frank stood up. Get dressed, I'll take you there. This cemetery buried many people, including my parents and Frank's father. When Frank had someone repair the tombstone, he deliberately placed them together. This way, every time I visited my parents, would remember that Frank's father died because of whom. I crouched down in front of Uncle Shin's tombstone, placed a small bouquet of daisies in front of his photo, and whispered, Uncle, I'm sorry. Uncle Shin's gaze remained kind. He once kindly told me, our Qingshi is relying on you. I thought we would always be happy together. But 3 years ago, shortly after our wedding, my parents and Uncle Shin died in a car accident. My cousin Helen hit her head and has been in a coma ever since. The driver was my father. From then on, my peaceful and happy life was completely destroyed. I glanced at my parents, hesitating.
Why?
Regret not paying respects to the culprit? Frank's tone was even colder than usual. He once clearly told me, if you have no conscience, you can sweep the tomb for your parents right in front of my father. I want to clean the weeds for them. Frank was silent for a while, then said, you can. My heart trembled, and I said gratefully, thank you. The early spring wind was a bit chilly and my cold hadn't fully healed, making it hard to breathe. I almost ran back to my parents' tombstone.
Just as I was about to say something,
Frank suddenly hugged me from behind, in an overly intimate posture, smiling lightly and said to my parents, Uncle and Aunt, I brought A's to see you. I stiffened. He hadn't spoken to me in such a tone for a long time. The next moment, Frank whispered in my ear, should we show Uncle and Aunt how affectionate we are? My mind buzzed, and my face turned pale. Was he crazy? Frank undid the top button of my clothes, his eyes filled with hatred. Be good. Put your hands on their tombstone. I struggled, engulfed by overwhelming humiliation. Please don't do this. Frank ignored me, planting one cold kiss after another on my ear. I leaned against the tombstone, finally crying out, I'm sorry. I won't pay respects anymore. Don't treat me like this. Frank finally stopped. Who are you apologizing to? Uncle Shun, I'm sorry. With my last bit of strength, I squeezed out these words and blacked out, collapsing to the ground. Patellar fracture requires long-term rehabilitation exercises, otherwise it will affect walking. The doctor stood by the bed, explaining the precautions to Frank. All right, money is not an issue. Use the best treatment plan. Mr. Shin, rest assured. The pain in my knee constantly tormented my sanity. What a stroke of bad luck to collapse and kneel on a stone edge. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts muddled. To be honest, at this point, I didn't know if it would be better to die directly or to continue living and enduring the torment. A hand rested on my forehead. Cool. I slowly turned my eyes to see Frank's face, instinctively dodging. But I couldn't avoid it. He was unusually gentle. Eyes, you're still feverish. Take your medicine later. I hid under the blanket, and after a long time, I said, "Can we get a divorce?" Frank's expression stiffened. He smoothed my disheveled hair and said softly, "No, Eyes, don't even think about it. I won't let you go until my death." Perhaps due to the physical trauma, even my dreams were unpleasant. The accident first happened. My second uncle was the only one who could take charge. He said, "Your father was the perpetrator." That car accident killed Frank's father, and my daughter Helen is still in critical condition. Please, you should think about what to do next. That day, Frank walked out of the morgue, expressionless. Chinchur, I raised my hand, and at the moment of touching him, he coldly said, "Don't touch me." That tone of disgust, I would never forget it in my life. The complications from the surgery brought me too much suffering. Frank often leaned by the window, holding an unlit cigar, calmly watching me gradually wither away. The doctor said I was a bit anemic. He didn't spare any expense on food and medicine, but I couldn't eat. Laura called during meals, which had become routine. Whether it was out of insecurity or deliberate provocation, she called 3 times a day, without fail. When Frank answered the phone, he sat by my side. While serving me food, he agreed to Laura's request to go horseback riding with her next week. In 2 months, I had withered to skin and bones. In fact, I didn't understand what he was thinking. Why not give me a quick end? Or perhaps the pain of losing his loved ones needed someone to bear for the rest of his life, and I was that person. 2 months later, I was discharged from the hospital. Long confinement in the ward had turned my skin into an unhealthy pale. My legs still needed time to heal. I got an electric wheelchair. Frank resumed his busy life, as if deliberately humiliating me. His and Laura's gossip frequently appeared in today's news reports. I stared blankly at the news on the hospital corridor's large screen until the nurse pulled me back to reality. "Miss Jiang, you can visit now." "Okay, thank you." I turned the wheelchair and entered the intensive care unit. The blackout curtains were quietly closed. Auntie looked at me, then continued knitting a sweater by the window for Helen. I came to Helen's side, held her hand, and said, "Sister, I'm here to see you." Before, my sister was the one who loved me the most. Whatever was good to eat or play, she always gave it to me first. She was the person I would risk my life to protect. So all these years, I never refused Auntie's requests. The equipment beside the bed beeped, and I felt the warmth of her fingertips, blinking away the stinging in my eyes. I wanted to say something, but there seemed to be nothing new to say. "Time's up, leave." Auntie put down the sweater, impatiently urging. Just as I was about to pull my hand back, I suddenly froze. "Half an hour. Don't push your luck." I stared at Auntie dumbstruck. "Sister, she seems to have moved."
Moved.
I swallowed hard, unbelievably looking back at the finger she was holding my breath. Auntie's face changed, filled with joy, and she rushed out. "Doctor, my daughter woke up. The room was left only with me, and my sister." A beam of light fell on her eyelashes, gently trembling, and Helen opened her eyes. I was so excited that I couldn't speak coherently. "Helen, you." Helen's gaze slowly fell on my face. A tear rolled down from the corner of her eye. She moved her dry lips, as if speaking. I leaned closer. "Take it slow. I'm listening." Her lips opened and closed, saying, "Eyes, I'm sorry." After that, I was pushed to the back by the rushing doctors, nurses, and Auntie. I sat in the wheelchair, staring blankly at the white wall. Helen's last words echoed in my mind. She said it was my father who was driving. 3 years, I had countless times wished that I could replace everyone and die that day. But in the end, I turned out to be a victim too. When I left the hospital, there was a light drizzle in the sky. I lowered my head, and after several failed attempts, I finally called Frank. It was Laura who answered. "He's taking a shower. You can tell me if you need anything." Her tone was arrogant, not hiding her smugness. As if to prove her words, the sound of water could be heard from the receiver. I was silent for a while, thinking it was good news for her. "Laura, a divorce. Please tell him, and let's set a time." Frank occupied too many memories of my early life, from the unrestrained liking in my adolescence to the passionate love after adulthood, and then to the willingly enduring torment out of guilt. It seemed to have lasted too long. It was time to leave. No need, she said cheerfully. Whether you divorce or not won't affect my position in his heart. Laura, when we got married, there was no property notarization. What do you mean? That means everything Frank gives you, I can legally reclaim. Laura paused, then sneered. On what grounds? You're just a dog begging for mercy. On the grounds that I'm his wife. I pushed aside my wet black hair. Even if he married a dog, he can make you penniless. So, please convey my intention to Frank, a smooth divorce, and I won't pursue your matters. Laura hung up the phone directly. Helen was soon discharged. Hearing that I was going to move out, she said, it's good too. My dad has been gambling all these years, squandering the family fortune. If Frank wants to take revenge, let him find him. I remember you wanted to study abroad before, right? I sighed. Forget it. Too tiring. All these years, all my savings went into Helen's treatment. Actually going to a new place, leaving Frank's influence, and finding a stable job would be good too. All right, let me know when you move. I have some friends who can help you with the luggage. The scattered clothes, shoes, and small items filled 2 suitcases, with some space left.
I didn't plan to take the rest.
I had previously sent a voice recording to Frank. Unexpectedly, he agreed. Helen's friends were supposed to come at 6 in the evening. At 5:30, there was a knock on the door. My legs were just recovering, so I slowly walked over, leaning on the wall. I turned the doorknob. The door opened a crack and someone immediately pushed in a foot. It wasn't Helen's friends, but a familiar face. Frank's partner, Donald, the one who once asked me to take off my clothes. Long time no see, sister-in-law. He stood in the light, casting a suffocating shadow with his tall figure. I tried to close the door, but he blocked it with his hand. He's busy, so I'm here to talk to you. But a divorce requires the presence of both parties. He easily pushed the door open, lazily loosened his tie, and walked in. I stepped back, bumping into the dining table, almost falling. He slapped the contract on the table, leaning on both sides. The pungent smell of tobacco was nauseating. Donald's gaze was very lewd, boss said. Divorce is fine, but you have to take half of the $2 million in marital debt. Is this Frank's intention? Donald raised his eyebrows, indicating I look at the contract. I recognized Frank's signature at a glance. I wasn't aware, the law won't judge. Donald laughed out loud. As long as he wants. Yes, Frank was all-powerful. As long as he wanted, he could easily make me shoulder millions in debt. But it was my second uncle who committed the crime. Why was he still holding on to me? I wanted to call him, but Donald suddenly lowered his head, his lips brushing against my hair. How about it? Follow me, I'll help you. The deliberately flirtatious breath made me feel an immediate chill. I pushed against his chest. Stay away from me. At the same time, the phone hidden behind me was about to call the police. Suddenly, a tearing pain came from my scalp. Donald, who had been relatively kind, instantly changed his face. A worn-out toy that Frank played with. I'm doing you a favor by touching you. I was pushed to the ground. My knee hit the floor tiles again, immediately losing sensation. The phone flew far away.
No.
I struggled, engulfed by immense fear. Help. Sister-in-law, you're quite pretty. Boss doesn't know how to cherish. I'll do it. Last time you took off your clothes pretty quickly. Aren't you just a slut? What are you pretending for? My back seemed to be scratched. Donald pulled my collar, his hand reaching for my waist. I was pale, struggling fiercely, and got slapped a few times. The phone screen in the distance kept lighting up. In the chaos just now, I had accidentally dialed Frank's number. I stretched out my hand in vain, staring at the phone screen. This call was my last hope. However, a few seconds later, the other party rejected the call. The screen flickered twice and went dark. My last hope was shattered. I stopped struggling. Even crying was done. So when the police rushed in, I was still stupidly lying on the ground, wrapped in the coat Helen's friend gave me. The girl held my face, saying repeatedly, "It's not your fault. Don't cry. He's been arrested. He didn't succeed. We're all here with you." I didn't know why someone was recording. I didn't know why the once deserted neighborhood suddenly became crowded. On the way to the hospital, I saw my small video posted online. The top comment was, having an affair with her lover, couldn't agree on the price, how women who cheat should be beaten to death. Without knowing the full picture, one shouldn't comment. Hey, it's attempted rape, and you're not commenting? Are you okay? Isn't it just attempted rape? They couldn't agree. I leaned against the car window, staring at the dark sky, thinking this should be the most painful day since my parents' death. I cried silently, tears streaming down my face. The police and a few girls in the car all tacitly kept silent. Everyone was protecting my last bit of dignity and decency. The doctor said my knee was damaged again, and it would be very difficult to fully recover. I accepted this reality. I called the lawyer I had contacted before. I'm sorry, Ms. Jiang, our law firm is too small. Are you sure you want to entrust us with this attempted rape case? Yes, I can only afford a little money, so just do your best. My mother was right. Without money, it's hard to move an inch. But no matter how hard, I still have to try to live. Because it's not my fault. On the way to the treatment room, Frank pushed the door in. His usually neat appearance was a bit disheveled. His face showed rare panic, quickly locking onto me in the crowd. The light made his face pale.
Gaze.
I sat in the wheelchair, quietly looking at him. My cheeks were covered with finger marks, still burning with pain. It was no exaggeration to say I was covered in wounds. It had been too long since I saw him worried about someone. Frank slowly walked to me, crouched down, wanting to touch my face. I raised my hand and gently pushed it away. Just said very calmly, "Can I see your phone?"
Sure.
He hurriedly handed me the phone. It was just like when we were dating. The password is your birthday. The interface unlocked. The background was my sleeping profile. I didn't have time to care, just opened his messages and scrolled down. Finally saw the message with an attachment. Pressed under many messages. Not even opened. So that's it. My eyes were sore, pulling a smile uglier than crying. You didn't listen to the recording I sent you. Frank's expression stiffened, staring at the file. I played it in front of him. It was Helen. Frank finally signed the divorce agreement. He gave Deborah a lot of property and entrusted a lawyer to handle the matter. Then, calmly divorced. Deborah quietly left his world. No news at all. Frank mechanically did what he should do. He dealt with Donald and Paul. He used some means, and Donald experienced the taste of being harassed in prison. Paul died on a highway abroad, tied to the driver's seat in the same manner as before, burned to ashes. The remaining time, Frank stayed at home, repeatedly cooking porridge and dishes according to Deborah's old recipes. Oil splashed on the skin, causing blisters. Frank thought, so that's how she felt at that time. Even knowing that these dishes would eventually be thrown away, she still did not tire of it. Over and over again. No matter how much one likes, it will be worn out. As Xiaoqin said, he lived in hell, year after year. Living alone, earning money alone, sponsoring children to go to school. Once a rising star in the business world, at the age of over 30, he exuded an aura of late life. Jiang Qinchin was right. He would live in guilt and loneliness, but that was not retribution. The word retribution itself is just a joke people make to comfort themselves. Frank didn't know what he should do to alleviate the growing sense of guilt in his heart. This spring, he suddenly longed for A's, even if he could secretly take a glance. After several inquiries, he found out that she lived in a neighboring city, not far from him. Frank packed up and drove alone to her city. At the hospital entrance, he saw Deborah coming for follow-up appointment. She was standing, not in a wheelchair. Frank breathed a sigh of relief, but then noticed a tall man standing beside Deborah. The sun was just right, his side profile bathed in light, smiling gently. Frank felt like he was hit, staring at him intently. Very similar. Just like how he was when he was young. Deborah held his arm, just like any ordinary couple he had seen, peaceful and serene. The nurse came out. "Oh, by the way, these are the medicines you left here last time." The man turned back to thank the nurse, his other hand still protecting Deborah, in case she fell off the steps. Frank's face turned pale. Was she married? Just then, Deborah's gaze inadvertently swept over. He covered his mouth with a mask and hid behind the corner, only to hear the man ask, "What's wrong?" Deborah's familiar voice sounded lighthearted. "That person looks a bit like an acquaintance. Should we go over and take a look?" "No, the movie is about to start," Deborah urged, obviously in a good mood. The man laughed. "All right, there's still time, no rush. Before that, I can take you for ice cream." Frank, like possessed, followed them to the cinema. He sat right behind them. He thought, maybe, Deborah hadn't forgotten him. Otherwise, why would she find a man so similar to him? Even the way she spoke, exactly the same as when he was young. If he appeared and wanted to take her away, would she go with him? During the entire love movie, he didn't watch a single word, just stared at the people in front. The more it went on, the more certain he became Deborah would. This might be his last chance to make amends. As they exited the cinema, the dazzling lights made people's eyes sting. Frank quickened his pace, about to reach out and tap Deborah's shoulder, when they were stopped by someone on the side of the road conducting a social survey. Calm down, Frank told himself. Don't do it in a crowded place, it might scare A's. It's not a few minutes late, just wait. He also took the opportunity to order a bouquet of flowers. He stopped a short distance away, pretending to be interested in a love novel on the bookstore's display shelf. The reporter asked, "How long have the two of you known each other?" "A year," the man answered naturally. "Who pursued whom first?" "I pursued my wife first." He seemed proud of it. The reporter then handed the microphone to Deborah.
What attracted you to him?
Frank stopped what he was doing and looked up. He saw the light in Deborah's eyes. "I like the way he does research." "Research?" "Yes, he's a medical professor. Research is one of his daily jobs." His phone vibrated, and Frank looked down to see that the flowers had been ordered. Deborah continued, "And he likes little dogs, we have two, and he's also a good photographer, takes great photos." This should be the most piercing words Frank had ever heard. He stared at the successful order interface, feeling somewhat ironic. Yes, what right did he have to think that Deborah still liked him? He was allergic to dog fur and didn't like photography. He thought Deborah found a substitute, but in fact, she just happened to like that type of person. That's all. As the evening approached, the sunset was like a splash of fireworks, burning half the sky. Frank's last chance for redemption also disappeared. He started the car, just wanting to accompany Deborah one last time, to watch her walk towards happiness with his own eyes. The traffic lights flashed and finally turned green. Deborah and her husband stepped onto the pedestrian crossing. A roaring sound came from afar. Frank looked far away. A runaway oil tanker was recklessly braking through the guardrail, heading towards the pedestrian crossing that in fact, sometimes a person's fate is decided in just 1 second. Frank drove his car and blocked the oil tanker. A few seconds later, a huge crash echoed through the sky. The oil tanker was hit off course, heading towards the greenbelt. The car was flipped over a few meters away, followed by a piercing screech and white smoke. The onlookers who witnessed this were scared out of their wits, retreating in panic. The airbag popped out. Frank had lost all sense of pain. He was suspended in the car, turning his head to look outside. The pair of white flat shoes paused briefly before quickening its pace towards the distance. Gradually, the white calves were seen, then the hand across the waist, and finally, the back of Deborah and her husband. The distant sunset was brilliant, beautiful like a painting. Frank stretched out his hand, vaguely catching Deborah's back, as if saying a final goodbye.
Gaze.
Then, an earth-shattering explosion swept through everything. Flames licked the accident vehicle, burning away all the past. At this moment, Deborah suddenly received a call as she walked to the side of the road. "Hello, ma'am. We have a bouquet of flowers for you. Only your phone number was filled in. Please give us an address." "Flowers? You didn't order any flowers. But the other party has already paid. Please tell us an address." Deborah, still in shock, looked at the crossroad. She gave them the address there. After hanging up, she worriedly looked at the crossroad. His family must be very sad. Her husband patted her head. "He saved our lives." "Yes, so I gave the address here. I hope he can have a good life in his next life." Her husband took her hand. "Let's go. The hospital tonight probably won't be quiet." As they left, Deborah seemed to sense something, looking back at the accident car one last time. Then she quickened her steps, walking towards her beloved.